Matt, do you prefer market socialism to central planning because it's more realistic to implement, or do you think central planning doesn't work?
Well, so, we get into these taxonomical questions. The thing is, I think central planning versus market socialism, I feel like with a lot of these things, we're creating these binaries that don't necessarily exist in reality, right? You got some, so it's important to understand what are we talking about when we say central planning versus socialism. I think the way you want to break this down is when you're trying to figure out how to allocate resources, in particular how to allocate productive resources, labor and capital, not necessarily the consumer products, that's a slightly different thing. But when we're talking about, we got all these people that need to work, we got all this material that we want to use, how are we going to combine them and where are we going to put them? And are we going to build a building over here? Are we going to build a building over there, et cetera, these sort of questions. And the central question is, to what extent is it useful or necessary to allow prices and money to send information, to create information that you then use to decide, let's put this building here? And to what extent can you do that with other kinds of information? So it's really a question of what informational inputs do you need to reasonably efficiently allocate labor and capital factors to produce useful things. What kind of information do you need? And I would say sometimes it seems like you need something like price information. You don't have to call it prices and money if you want. You could also call it weighted preference devices, right? Because that's what prices, if they're going well, can do for you. Other times you don't, right? So I'll give two examples here. Let's think about public schools. Public schools some people say they're decommodified. I have a little bit of a problem with that, but we'll leave that aside. We have a system in the U.S. where everyone is entitled to go to public school, basically, and 90% of people do go to public school. But, our population grows and our population changes and our population migrates from various parts of the country. There used to be a lot of people in Detroit. Now there's less. There's used to be not that many people in Texas. Now there's a ton of people in Texas. And so how do you know where to build schools and when to build schools and how many schools to build? Note that with public schools, there's no price. No one is buying a public school seat. There's money, the state allocates money to teachers and all that kind of stuff, but there's not like a free floating price where like you pay for enrollment in a particular school, right? And you don't need those prices to do the planning. That information, that price information, is not necessary because you can just use population information. You can just count the number of kids in the area or count the number of adults of a certain kind of age who we know are probably going to have kids, a certain percentage of them. You can use basically population information to determine how many schools to build, right? You don't need the price information there. You don't need a market there. You have other kinds of information that allow you to plan, right? So that's a very classic example. That is, the schools are in a very real sense centrally planned. The decision of how many to build, how many teachers to hire, that is done in a central planning type way that uses population information as the planning input, not price information, right?
Right.
On the flip side, and we've talked about this before on a podcast, when it comes especially to consumer markets, it gets a little bit trickier. We talked about this this charity in the U.S. called Feeding America. It's the biggest food charity in the country. It has all these affiliate food banks across the country. It's basically a big central clearinghouse for hundreds, maybe thousands of food banks across the country. It gets these huge donations in from big corporations, like Jif will send them 40 pallets of peanut butter or whatever, and it's got to figure out who among its network gets all of this stuff, right? So it has to make an allocation decision. And the way it has grown to do that over time, which appears to be very effective, is it gives all of its affiliate food banks a certain number of points that are based on the number of people they serve. So if you have a food bank that serves 300 people a day, you get 300 points, something like that. I don't know if it's exactly like that, right? And then you use the points to buy the stuff. There's an auction each morning, a sealed bid auction, where they put up all the stuff they've gotten, that day, or that they're putting up that day. And you can go through, see what's on the menu, and use your points to try to buy it. And whoever puts in the highest bid gets it, and they have to give up that number of points. And so you see, they're using basically a kind of population-weighted way of distributing what is effectively currency, and then there is then by making people use the currency to bid, they create a weighted preference sort of indicator, and that is the information that they then use to distribute goods and services. That to me seems very sensible. And I don't know otherwise how you would know who wants the peanut butter the most and who needs the peanut butter the most. I don't know how you would do that in a better way than that. So long story short, sometimes you can plan without price information. Sometimes it's hard to plan without price information. Just be pragmatic about it. It's not the be-all, end-all. What socialism is about fundamentally is collective ownership of the means of production, not the use of this or that informational source to do the planning. That's not fundamentally what it's about. So just don't fret too much about that question. I think it's too people dwell on it too much.